Yeah, now that the kids are gone, we're getting serious. But we're doing this series for 4 weeks where 4 different preachers, Bill last week preached, and I'm going to give you a sports analogy, okay? So I don't usually do sports analogies, but it's kind of like when you have a tee off and there's rough on either side, and what Bill did is he took the club and he whacked that ball straight down the fairway, so all I gotta do is chip it on the green. So that's what we're doing today. But I'm not really good at chipping or golf, so we'll see how this works. Brittany will be preaching and Ben will be preaching as well as we think about this topic of what does it mean to kind of have our faith redefined for us by powers that are political in the world. The power of Christian nationalism in this country that is troubling for us. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if Christian nationalism is troubling for you, but we feel like that this is troubling, and I think as a congregation we would all agree. And so that's why we're addressing this. So let me get started here. As you know, by now, maybe some of you don't, but I grew up in South Africa, and I first crossed the Atlantic Ocean when I was just shy of my 19th birthday. I took a plane. I'm not old enough to have needed a boat. And I landed in Chicago, and I remember it being like a hot and humid, muggy day in Chicago. And I encountered within hours of landing in this beautiful country the strangest thing in the American landscape. Water towers. I had never seen a water tower, and I remember like looking out the minivan window as I was driving on the highway away from over here, and I was like, what is that? We don't have water towers in the beautiful mountainous Cape Town. We just put the water up in reservoirs on top, and so I didn't know what they were. Later that fall, I started college at Moody Bible Institute down in Chicago, a very conservative Christian college. And by that time, I kind of got used to water towers. But something happened that fall that really took me by surprise in the American landscape politically, and that was not just that George Bush was elected, but the palpable excitement on the faces and in the voices of young college students on that Christian campus, because they were saying things like, George Bush is a real Christian. Like, this is so good for the country. Now, up until that point, I had lived in South Africa, and there were a number of presidents when I was growing up, but the main president during my high school years when I was kind of aware of these things was Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, who dismantled apartheid, who brought a divided nation together, who inspired the world. But they were so excited about George Bush, I was like, well, if Nelson Mandela was good, George Bush is good, this is gonna be great. It's gonna be great. And I kind of got caught up in it. I was like, maybe this is a good thing for Christianity. But what I didn't realize was I was hearing subtle whispers of an element of Christian nationalism, because they weren't just excited that George Bush had Christian values or values that would be for the betterment of all people. They were excited because of the power of Christianity. And one of the ways that we can best understand Christian nationalism is actually to compare it to Christianity, because they're very different. Christianity is the teachings of Jesus and following those teachings and living them out in community. And Christian nationalism is an ideology which is political, which talks about the power of Christianity to own essentially the country. And so I looked up some definitions of Christian nationalism, and the ACLU describes it this way: political ideology that seeks to merge American civil life with a specific culturally conservative interpretation of Christianity. And they cited this really telling survey that was given to Republicans in North Dakota, and 42% agreed with this statement: God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. So let me just say that again. 42% of people, Republicans, almost half of all Republicans in that state agreed that God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. That is Christian nationalism. That is not Christianity. Now, you can be a Christian and flirt with or have a relationship with Christian nationalism, but the more you step into that area, the more you have to give up of what it really means to be a Christian. And that was what Bill was encouraging us to do last week, is whatever we think about our political values, we have to let Christ be the one who is above everything, and then Christ redefines our political strategies, not the other way around, where our political strategies are starting to pull us away to some sort of politicized sense of Christianity. I wanted to go a little bit deeper into what Christian nationalism looks like, but I also wanted to contrast it with my experience of what Mandela and many of us as Americans would agree with. Mandela said, "To be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others." Christian nationalism asks, how can a nation become Christian through and through? And our version would say, how can a nation become just and free truly for everybody? So Christianity Today is a very prominent magazine I'm sure you've all heard of. It's not particularly liberal, but it's been taking issue ever since January 6th and maybe even before, but I noticed it after January 6th how they started to pick up on Christian nationalism. The magazine says, Christian nationalists want to define America as a Christian nation. They want the government to promote a specific cultural template as the official culture of the country. And oftentimes, that's an Anglo culture. Some advocate for an amendment to the Constitution to recognize America's Christian heritage. Others to reinstate prayer in public schools. Some work to enshrine a Christian nationalist interpretation of American history in school curricula, including, and listen to this, that America has a special relationship with God and has been chosen by Him to carry out a special mission on earth. That's a little problematic. Others advocate for immigration restrictions specifically to prevent a change to American religious and ethnic demographics or change to American culture. Some want to empower the government to take stronger action to circumscribe immoral behavior, and some have argued that the United States government must defend and enshrine its predominant Anglo-Protestant culture to ensure the survival of American democracy. So I don't know. This is why we're talking about this. This is an attack on what we believe in as Christians. This is not what we hope for our country. This is not what we hope for our faith. This is something that is very strong and growing and troubling in our culture, right? Mandela said when he was inaugurated, "We enter into a covenant that we shall build a society in which all South Africans, both black and white, will be able to walk tall without any fear in their hearts, assured of their inalienable right to human dignity, a rainbow nation at peace with itself and the world." And when I first came to the United States, there was a phrase that was used a lot, and I'd seen it. I don't know how I even knew it, but I knew this phrase, the melting pot. Yeah? I feel like now there are some people in this country that want to melt the melting pot into liquid iron and recast it into something different. But I know that that is not the heart and soul of us, of people of faith, and of true Christian faith, and I believe of our country. So what do we do when Christian nationalism begins to melt down what we hold sacred and erode what we love, and when it seeks to distort our faith? And I really believe that a big part of this answer lies in the verse that our kids said for us today. Christ gives me the strength to face anything, even Christian nationalism. And the antidote to Christian nationalism is found in that verse. It's the word Christ. The antidote to Christian nationalism is Christ. A true belief in Jesus, what Jesus stands for, his self-sacrifice, Jesus' love, Jesus' inclusion, Jesus' acceptance, the values and teaching of Jesus, that is at the heart of what it means to fight back against Christian nationalism in a nonviolent, values-driven way. And I believe that a big part of that, and I'm glad that we're talking about it on VBS Sunday, because I think a big part of this is what we pass on to the next generation. When we talked with our kids about their gifts, they were like, presents, you know, and of course, because we don't always like define words for kids. They have to learn them, and these are young kids, even preschoolers. But we said, it's like Ben was saying, it's not just a talent, something that you're good at. It's something that you can give to the world. And one girl said, I have the gift of having good conversations with people. I was like, that is good, that is good. People said, we said to the kids and helped them to like say back to us, you have the gift of encouraging others. You have the gift of kindness. You have the gift of love, of joy, of peace, of patience. And they were like, well, I'm not very patient. And I'm like, that's okay, because you just have to be patient a little bit, and it will grow. And you just have to fan into flame these gifts that God has given you, and it will make a change. And I really believe that our children, and of course this is so cliche, but our children really are the future. And that's why it's so important to me that we put all this energy into VBS and into JAM, into our midweek program, and into Sunday mornings. Because when we can invest in these children, and they are worth every ounce of investment, when we invest in them, they can start to see what it means to really be the change that we need in the world. One of the things that I love about our church, and you might not think of this as children's ministry, but it kind of is that we model for our kids. When we go out to protest ICE, when we as a congregation went out for a couple of months and stood at the bus stop where people were afraid to line up to go to school because of the ICE raids, and we made sure that they were safe to get on the bus to go to school, that was a way to model to those children, to our community, and to our kids in this church who watch us, what it means to have the values of Jesus, the bravery and the tenacity and the love and the care and the compassion to not just look the other way, but to engage. When we host PADS, when we connect with Vita House, the refugee family that we connect with and support and sponsor, the unhoused population that our kids have collected all of these summer items that they'll need. We talked about that at VBS. Why do unhoused people need bug spray and sunscreen and these things in the summer? And we are raising not only bravery and things like that and tenacity in our kids, but we're also raising compassion. We're raising gentleness and kindness and goodness. And these are the values that Christ gives us the strength to face anything through these values of Christ. Christ is the antidote to Christian nationalism. Christ is the weapon that we fight Christian nationalism with Christ's values. I have raised some American kids. I think they're in the back somewhere over there. Hi. They're also Canadians, they're dual citizens, and we've had a lot of trips to South Africa, so they're probably a little mixed up about, where they are. But this has been a great country for my wife and I to raise our kids. And Chicago has been a great city, and the suburbs have been great, and our kids have got wonderful education and great support and all kinds of, blessings from being here in this country. And when my kids came back from first grade and said, I said the Pledge of Allegiance, I was like, what does pledge mean? What does allegiance mean? They're like, well, they didn't tell us that, but we say it every day. And I said, if you're promising to serve something, what is it that you're promising to serve? And we've had lots of great conversations about that. When George Floyd was murdered, we went out to the protests that were popping up. And my kids joined me in protesting and saying, Black Lives Matter. This is a country where we can raise our kids to have these values, but we have to be intentional because sometimes we say things, and I don't say this to offend anyone, but we sometimes will say the military, like no matter who they are or what they are, we appreciate them. And yet, I've talked to my kids about how we do want to appreciate service, loyalty, and people that do what they believe is right. And yet, the military deals out death around the world on our behalf in a very unjust way. And I want the tension to exist for my children and for me. I don't want it just to be one thing. It's not that I hate the military or I hate the police or anything like that at all. But there's a tension between violence and systemic racism that exists. And this is why Christ is the antidote to Christian nationalism, because Christ helps us to see the world through Christian, Christ-centered eyes so that we can build the kind of world that I believe America truly can be. In the, I forget if it's the preamble to the Constitution, but or the Constitution itself, but it talks about how there was this desire for a more perfect union. And this aspiration for a more perfect union, this belief that all people are created equal with inalienable rights, this idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, these are things that we can be proud of for our country. It's not that we can't have our faith inform our country. It's that we don't want faith to sit on top, power hungry, deciding that everyone has to fall in line with a certain set of principles that leave some people out and put some people in. Faith is this bottom-up source of power that God gives us to lay down our lives, to serve. Christ gives us the strength to face anything. And maybe you need to hear that today. I've been saying that a lot, but maybe you need to hear that. If you are feeling depleted, or if you are feeling like there's so much that we can't handle it or tackle it all, you may be right. Together, we can do so much. All the things that I've listed and so many more that we do as a church and as individuals. And if you are feeling depleted, I want you to know two things. One, you don't have to do everything or all the things or feel like this lands on you. But two, Christ gives you the strength to do anything, to do the things that you are called to do, to live out the values that you believe in. And I truly believe that we will get through this. I believe that we will see the hopes that we have for our faith and the hopes that we have for our country resurge. I got some hate mail this week. It was actually printed out, 3 pages. At first I was like, is this, just a generic thing? But they referenced some sermons that I've preached, so if you're listening, hi. Listen to this one. But they basically just berated our church, what we stand for, our values, and we are up against a powerful Christian nationalist agenda that would seek to silence us. That's why we need the strength that Christ gives us to face anything. That's why we can take in the bumps and the hate mail and the people in our families who don't agree with us and the difficult tensions that we have to navigate. The world needs us. It needs us to take hold of the strength that Christ gives us and move into that to make the world a better place. Let's pray. God, thank you that you love all of your people. And you understand the tensions that we're in, the difficulties that we find ourselves, and the complexities of this world. And yet, in Jesus, you give us this crystal clear path that's value-based. We might not always know exactly how it works or how it plays out, but we don't have any doubt that it calls for love, humility, kindness, joy, peace, patience, goodness, faithfulness, self-control, that it calls for these laying down of our life and power to lift everybody up, no matter of race or creed or religion or color or orientation or gender identity or any other marker that makes us human, that we're all human together because we're all made in your image. I pray that we would take hold of the strength that you give us to face anything, that your kingdom may come on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.